insight into this high-stakes diplomatic mission, I'm joined by former Secretary of State to the Clinton administration, Madeleine Albright. Madam Secretary, thanks for being here. You know Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov from your time in your days in the UN. Is there a realistic chance that something specific, something real, in the words of the president, can actually be done here after 2.5 years of Russia blocking even a press release about chemical weapons in Syria in the UN Security Council?
Jake, it's good to be with you. I do think there's a realistic chance, but I think it's going to take a while. This is a very complicated process. From my understanding, Secretary Kerry has been talking to Foreign Minister Lavrov for some time. They obviously did that Geneva Accord about having a conference. But getting a resolution is not a simple issue because there will be aspects of whether there has to be a ceasefire or what kind of a mandate the inspectors will have. So just getting a resolution is tough. And so it will take time, but I do think it's realistic. And the reason I think so is that the Russians have a reason that they want to do this.
What is the reason?
Well, I think there's several. Some have to do with the fact that they are nervous themselves about terrorists and chemical weapons and what that might do in certain areas of Russia.
Like Chechnya, for example.
Yeah. And also that Putin has been looking for a way to kind of re-equalize himself in terms of being a major power. Frankly, they do not want us to strike, so they have a reason for doing this. And the question is whether the language of it can be worked out, and then all the modalities of how you actually get a inspection team and how they get there and what their mandate is. So I think the hardest part about this, Jake, is that there's no instant solution to this.
Right, no, of course, but one of the things that Vladimir Putin said yesterday was that there needs to be an immediate the U.S. needs to take back the threat of force. President Obama thinks, and I think you would probably agree, that it is the threat of force that got us into this possibility, into this area where possibly a diplomatic solution is possible. Secretary of Kerry can't take that off the table, right?
Well, I truly believe that it was the threat of force that brought this diplomatic possibility. Been there, done that, I have to tell you. I mean, this is the way that diplomacy works. You use the threat of the use of force to get some action in diplomacy, and then diplomacy to figure out what you do about the threat of the use of force. And I think it is a real issue that, I mean, Putin has put up something that makes it very difficult in terms of getting there if he insists that the United States remove the force, because that is, I believe, and the President said it also, and many of us have, that it was the threat of the use of force that brought about this possibility.
So that's a non-starter, right? I mean, Secretary Kerry can't give that up.
He can't, and I mean, it depends on how the language, on when would you give it up. I mean, one of the things I know from trying to get Security Council resolutions is that they take a while. You make a certain number of language changes and how it works, but my personal feeling here is that it is that threat of the use of force, and the President made very clear that it would stay that our ships would stay in the area and that the use of force would stay on the table.
Tell us about the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. Is he a practical man? Is he somebody with whom the U.S. can do business?
Well, I know him very well because we were together at the United Nations. He's many different things. He's very smart. He also does know UN procedure very well. He can be very nice and practical, and he can be the opposite. So I do think that Secretary Kerry, who has a great deal of experience with a variety of different characters, will work this from the very best aspect of being the American in this. But I do think that what we all have to understand is that this is going to be a complicated process. The whole issue in Syria has been unbelievably difficult and hard, really, for us to figure out exactly where our leverage and purchase can be.
But just to be clear, the best case scenario here is the chemical weapons are taken and destroyed. That could take several years. But Assad stays in power, and the bloodshed probably continues. He'd killed 100,000 people before he crossed the red line of chemical weapons.
Well, I think everybody has said is that ultimately this has to be a negotiated solution, and that Assad, in some way, first he has to agree to this. What I find really interesting about this, the Syrian government has now agreed to let the UN take control of chemical weapons that they said they didn't have. And President Putin has all of a sudden suggested that this happened over something that he said never happened.
Right.
So we have a
There is an
problem.
right. Reality has,
Right.
the sun of reality has risen.
Has risen. And I think also there has been the sense all along that ultimately this has to move to some kind of a transitional government. Some part
But Assad doesn't think that.
well, I think that one would look at various interviews he's done. I think he lies and he has made up his mind, but who knows? I mean, part of the story here is going to be does Putin make a phone call to Assad and said, this is, tell him this is what you have to do?
But don't the Russians think that Assad is the best you can get in Syria, that whatever comes to replace Assad could be a lot worse? And you could look at the example of Egypt of, at least Mubarak kept things under control.
I'm not sure it's Assad himself. I think the question is whether they are wedded to Assad the person or to the kind of a regime in terms of some of the other people that they believe maintain stability in the area. So that has to be one of the questions. Is it some specific attachment to Assad? I think what has to also happen is that the Russians have to stop delivering whatever, Putin himself said they are continuing to deliver arms. And the question is how to get the UN part of this done, develop the modalities for getting the inspectors there, and at the same time try to figure out whether there's some way to go to a negotiated solution with a transitional government. Is any of this easy? No.
Of course not. Right.
And I do think, and I must say and I believe this from my own experience, that the president's decision to use force has been the motivating factor to get into this diplomatic venue. I have talked to many members of Congress, and some of them would say, isn't there some way to get this diplomatic route? And I said, yes, but understanding that, in fact, having that threat of the use of force is really essential in terms of having it as the leverage in terms of your negotiations.
Last question, Madam Secretary. You're a diplomat. So I'm not going to ask you was, but you're a diplomat. The quality of being diplomatic has remained within you.
Right.
So I'm not going to ask you to criticize the Obama administration and their handling of this crisis. There's been plenty of criticism from the left and the right. What is your advice for Secretary Kerry in terms of a coherent and consistent message when he meets with Lavrov? And what is your advice for President Obama when it comes to a coherent and consistent message?
Well, I believe that the message that the president delivered last night was coherent and consistent in terms of explaining that as the United States, we can't just stand around watching as thousands, including children, have been gassed with an illegal form with the poison gas, and that international norm is very important, that we have a responsibility towards our allies, and that we are concerned generally about the security in the region, that is important to us. I think that Secretary Kerry obviously says the same thing in terms of the importance of this issue for America, for our credibility, for our security in the long run, because we don't want our troops exposed to chemical weapons. So I think that what the president did last night, I think in terms of taking on the questions that have been asked and responding to them, and there just needs to be an awful lot more explanation to the American people, primarily, I have to tell you, because there's a lot of overhang from the war in Iraq, and I know that there always is a historical context to what happens, and people remember what happened in Iraq, and they don't want to be in another war. So explaining why this is important, and I think both the Secretary and the President are doing that.